Why is he climbing that conduit shaft without a harness? Taltz blinked his secondary eyelids, puzzled as he stared at the human scaling the vertical maintenance tunnel. He's not even secured. This is reckless. Bordering on suicidal. He said he's done it before, grumbled Jorix, adjusting the sensor panel feed. Multiple times on Earth. Taltz's frons stiffened. Earth must be a lawless rock. The human in question, Kieran O'Donnell, reached the access node and wedged himself between two support bars, fiddling with a corroded relay box. His voice crackled through the comms. Got it. I'll just bypass the secondary relay. Should restore power to your environmental control room. You're not trained in atmospheric systems, Taltz said flatly. You're a linguistics student. I read the schematics last night. Taltz turned to Jorix in disbelief. Is that supposed to be comforting? Kieran's voice came again, strained. Okay, I've rerouted the damn it, a flash burst from the conduit. Sparks sprayed across the tunnel walls. Kieran let out a sharp cry and dropped from view. Human down, Jorix shouted, already leaping from the console. Taltz scrambled behind him, 3 legs clicking against the metallic floor. They reached the bottom of the shaft in seconds. Kieran lay twisted on the floor, not moving. Kieran. Jorix knelt beside him. He's burned, his left hand's charred, and he peeled back Kieran's shirt. Fractured ribs, at least 4. His shoulders dislocated, Kieran groaned. Still here, hurts like hell. Don't speak. Taltz tapped his comm. Medical, prepare quarantine bay 3, human burn trauma, possible spinal injury. No, do not move him yet, we'll stabilize here. 20 minutes later, the medics arrived in full gear, lifting Kieran onto a stiff board with cervical restraints. His left arm was motionless and his breathing shallow. 6 hours later, Kieran lay in the medbay, hooked to an Roman 4 and oxygen line, a sterile wrap over his arm and chest. The burns were 2nd degree, deep enough to destroy both layers of skin. His ribs were broken in 4 places and his right shoulder had been reset but was still swollen. Taltz stood near the foot of the bed, arms folded. You could have died. There were protocols, robots for that task. I know, Kieran rasped, voice weak. Didn't want your oxygen system failing again. The crew in Sector 7, they would have evacuated, Taltz snapped. You didn't have to climb into a live conduit, Kieran exhaled, slow and shaky. I didn't know it was live. I thought I'd isolated it. You're not an engineer. I read the schematics, Kieran repeated, grimacing as he adjusted slightly. Jorix entered, holding a datapad. Environmental systems are stable now, thanks to his reroute. But he took voltage levels straight to the chest, Taltz. He's lucky to be alive. Lucky, Taltz said. He's broken, burned, and unconscious half the time. Still alive, Kieran muttered. That counts. Jorix looked at him with a mix of frustration and admiration. You're the most reckless being I've ever met, Taltz stiffened. Reckless and foolish. 3 days later, Kieran was still confined to the medbay. The burns were healing slowly with dermal grafts. He couldn't move his left arm yet, and he winced every time he took a breath. Dr. Hava, the lead medical officer, checked the monitors. You'll need at least another week of rest. The ribs need time. Moving too early will risk puncturing a lung. I can't just lie here, Kieran said. There's work to do. You move again before I clear you and I'll bind you to the bed myself, Hava said, tapping on her tablet. You've already been through skin debridement twice. You won't survive another infection. Taltz entered silently. He stood beside the bed, arms behind his back. You acted without sense, but you did save 26 crew members. If the environment systems had failed, Jorix says the ammonia levels would have reached lethal thresholds in 6 minutes. Kieran looked up. Then it was worth it. No, it was necessary. But still reckless. Kieran gave a faint nod. I'll take that. Taltz stared at him for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. Later that evening, Jorix returned with a small tablet. Message from Commander Veles, you're being put up for a commendation, crew-saving actions. Life-risking bravery, that sort of thing. Kieran didn't smile. That's nice. Do I get a working shoulder back too, eventually? I didn't do it for an award. I know, Jorix said, setting the tablet aside. You did it because you thought no one else would. Kieran nodded slowly. I figured I could try. Jorix sat beside the bed. You scared everyone, even Taltz. I'm scared too, Kieran admitted. Everything hurts, I can't even stand yet. Then stop trying to fix everything alone, Jorix said. Some of us can help. Kieran didn't answer right away. His breathing was shallow, careful. Next time I'll ask first. You better. 7 hours after the incident, the training chamber outside the medbay was uncharacteristically silent. Normally, the student engineers from Jorix Academy would be running simulated repairs on auxiliary systems or mapping out energy flow equations on the massive hologrid. Instead, they sat clustered in uneven rows, mandibles tight and bioluminescent patches dim with unease. He's still unconscious, asked Brixel, one of the younger students, his antennae twitching irregularly. No, said Jorix, entering the room with a tablet under one arm. He woke up briefly an hour ago, spoke a few sentences, then passed out again. Dr. Hava says his body's trying to compensate. A low buzz passed through the group, a mixture of disbelief and something resembling discomfort. Taltz stood near the rear, arms folded tightly. We were told he wasn't authorized to perform system reroutes, that he lacked formal training. Why did he go into the conduit at all? He said he saw no one else moving to act, Jorix answered. He believed time was running out. That's not logic, said Brixel a bit too loudly. That's panic disguised as bravery. Jorix raised an eyebrow. He didn't panic. He calculated a risk and accepted the cost. But he didn't understand the circuitry configuration, said Life, one of the more advanced students. What if he had overloaded the stabilizer ring? The entire corridor could have collapsed under pressure. That didn't happen, Jorix replied. You're focusing on what could have gone wrong instead of what his actions prevented. What happened in Sector 7 was real. The ammonia leak had already begun. Taltz's gaze narrowed. He was fast, I'll concede that. But that doesn't make him rational. No, said Jorix, but it does make him responsible. 3 days later, Kieran was able to sit up for short intervals, though every movement sent splinters of pain through his torso. His voice was hoarse, his left arm still bound in a flex cast, and he had to lean against the wall to remain upright. Why are they staring at me like I'm under glass? He asked, glancing through the medbay's transparent barrier. Taltz stood just outside, arms clasped behind his back. They've never seen someone injure themselves willingly for others, not in this way. Kieran rubbed at his temple with his good hand. I didn't want to be a symbol of anything, just didn't want people to die on my watch. They were not your responsibility. I was there. That made it mine. Taltz tilted his head. You interpret presence as obligation, Kieran didn't answer right away. I guess I do. Jorix entered carrying a set of diagnostic readouts. Vitals are stabilizing. You're recovering faster than projected. I'm exhausted, Kieran said, slumping back. But I think I could walk in a day or two. You won't, Jorix said. Doctor's orders. Taltz stepped closer to the glass. You know they're divided about you. Some think you're unstable, and the others, they're confused, Taltz said. They don't understand why someone with no tactical mandate would risk organ failure to repair a system he wasn't trained for. Kieran looked down at his bandaged side. I don't blame them. A long pause followed, then Taltz asked, Would you do it again? Probably, Kieran said. If no one else moved and I thought there was a chance to stop something worse. Yeah, you say that while still in pain. Kieran's laugh was weak. Especially while in pain. Makes it easier to remember what matters. 2 days later, the alien students were assembled for a systems failure simulation. It was their first practical since the incident. The instructor, a wiry Thokali named Instructor Ren, issued the challenge without warning: simulate an atmospheric breach with cascading power loss across 3 sectors. The goal, Ren said, is to restore basic life support within 5 minutes using only local access terminals and personal equipment. No external guidance. Begin. The The students scattered instantly, forming triads and rushing to their stations. Brixel and Life took the upper terminals near the venting module, while Taltz worked on isolating the power loop beneath the main conduit. The room buzzed with calculations, shouted values, and the occasional jolt of frustration when systems refused to respond as expected. 3 minutes in, a subsystem looped in on itself and triggered a false feedback alert. Life hesitated, unable to decide whether to bypass or isolate. "Do something," Brixel hissed. "I don't want to trigger a real lockout." Taltz moved past them, grabbed the panel, and slammed a manual override. The system stuttered, then rebalanced. "Why did you do that?" Life asked, stunned. "Because if it had been real," Taltz said, "we'd be dead." They completed the simulation in 4 minutes, 36 seconds. Afterward, the students gathered around the debrief table. "I didn't expect you to override that loop," Brixel said to Taltz. "I realized we were hesitating because we feared the consequences of a wrong choice more than the cost of an action," Taltz answered. The human didn't hesitate. "And that's why we're still having this conversation." Silence followed. Then Life said, "I still think what he did was illogical, but maybe logic isn't always enough." Back in the med bay, Jorix sat beside Kieran, who was now able to stand for brief periods with assistance. His face was pale, but color was slowly returning. Taltz entered without ceremony. He didn't sit. "We ran a simulation today," he said. "Atmospheric breach, power failure, time constraint." "Let me guess," Kieran said. "Everyone argued for 4 minutes and then someone finally did something." "No," Taltz replied. "We completed it. Under time, I made the final call." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "You?" Taltz nodded once. "I bypassed 3 safety protocols. I was uncertain." "But I acted." Kieran leaned back, wincing slightly. "That's good. You'll get a medal." "I'm not looking for recognition," Taltz said. "I'm trying to understand." "Understand what?" The line between recklessness and courage. "I think it's thinner than I assumed." Kieran didn't answer. He didn't need to. An hour later, as the medbay lights dimmed for the rest cycle, Jorix stood at the observation window watching the human drift into sleep. Taltz stood beside him. "They still don't completely trust him," Jorix said quietly. "No," Taltz agreed. "But they've stopped calling him reckless." Jorix glanced over. "And now, they're calling him fast." Taltz's expression didn't change. "And necessary." 9 days after Kieran's injury, the Academy's central forum filled with a low but persistent hum. The students from the engineering cohort stood clustered in small groups, exchanging half-finished thoughts and glances that darted toward the raised dais at the front of the room. The air was heavy with anticipation, not because of the announcement about new coursework, but because of who was scheduled to speak. Kieran had insisted on walking in under his own power. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said as Jorix adjusted the support frame around his torso. "I've barely made it 20 steps without wheezing." "You're not here to impress anyone with your lung capacity," Jorix replied, tightening the clasp. "You're here because the council asked for it. The students need to hear from you." Kieran leaned against the panel beside the entrance, catching his breath. "What if I say the wrong thing? Then you'll confuse them," Jorix said. "Which is honestly no different from what you've been doing since you arrived." Taltz met them at the side entrance to the forum. "They've been restless. Some of them don't know how to reconcile what they saw with what they believe." Kieran blinked. "Believe about what?" "About what kind of creature you are," Taltz said. "You don't fit their framework. That unsettles them." "I don't fit most frameworks," Kieran muttered. The 3 stepped into the forum. Conversations tapered into silence. Kieran moved slowly, each step deliberate. No one offered assistance and none was asked for. He reached the dais and rested both hands on the rail. "I was told you wanted to ask me questions directly," he said. "So ask." There was hesitation at first. Then one of the younger students, a wiry being with a narrow crest of blue feathers, raised a hand. "Why did you act without confirming your technical proficiency? The situation wasn't fully assessed. You could have made the damage worse." Kieran nodded once. "Could have, yeah, I weighed that." But I knew I had maybe a few minutes before the system collapsed. I wasn't sure, but I had enough of a guess to try. Another student, taller and more rigid in posture, spoke next. Is guessing how your kind approaches engineering decisions? No, Kieran said. But in emergencies, we sometimes act before we're sure. It's not ideal, it's survival. A low murmur moved through the room. A third student, whose voice was higher and more clipped, tilted her head. But that's irrational. You risked your structural integrity. I did, Kieran said. And I'm still recovering, but if I hadn't done it, others might not be recovering at all. The murmurs grew louder. Taltz stepped forward, but Kieran raised a hand. He wasn't finished. It wasn't brave, he said. It wasn't smart either. I didn't know what would happen. But I saw a problem and didn't see anyone else moving, so I moved. That's all it was. From the edge of the room, life spoke without standing. You're saying the speed of your reaction mattered more than the accuracy of your knowledge. I'm saying sometimes the timing makes the difference, Kieran said. Even if you don't have it all figured out, doing something in the right moment can be enough. A long pause followed. Then Brixel asked, would you advise others to do the same? No, Kieran said without hesitation. I wouldn't tell anyone to do what I did. I just didn't see another option. A silence followed again, this time different, not judgmental, curious. After the forum, the crowd thinned slowly. Taltz approached Kieran as he leaned against the wall, catching his breath again. You didn't try to justify it, Taltz said. I'm not here to make it look better than it was. They're still processing it, Taltz said. They don't have a category for someone who acts without a mandate and accepts the consequence without protest. I don't need a category, Kieran muttered. I need a chair. Later that evening, Taltz and Jorik sat in the observatory lounge, where the stars wheeled silently overhead through a transparent dome. The students had mostly returned to their quarters, but their conversations lingered in the halls. They're not dismissing him anymore, Jorik said. No, Taltz agreed. They're trying to make sense of him. Do you think they'll start acting like him? I hope not, Taltz said. But I hope they understand why he did what he did. The next day, the engineering instructor called for a new simulation, this one different. The students were told to respond to an unexpected hull breach, but were given no schematic in advance. Instead, they entered a chamber designed to react dynamically to their actions. Each delay, each mistake would alter the outcome for the simulated crew. Brixel hesitated at a junction panel. Life moved to his right, unsure whether to isolate or divert. Time ticked past. Then a student named Vexen, previously one of the more cautious, stepped forward and rerouted the flow manually. The system groaned, then stabilized. Why did you do that? Life asked, stunned. Didn't have time to be sure, Vexen said, but I remembered what the human said. Sometimes the moment's more important than the certainty. The simulation ended 90 seconds later with the simulated crew unharmed. That evening, Kieran sat alone in the recovery wing, watching a slow rotation of a nearby moon on the wall screen. His left arm was still stiff and his chest still ached when he laughed, though he hadn't done much of that recently. Taltz entered without knocking. The students completed a new emergency trial. One of them acted without consensus. It worked. Kieran shifted slightly. I'm not sure if I should be proud or worried. I didn't say they acted recklessly, Taltz said. They acted quickly, there's a difference. Kieran turned his head. You think they're learning? I think they're adjusting, Taltz replied. Your behavior didn't align with their expectations. Now they're trying to find a new model. Kieran exhaled slowly. I'm not a model, I'm just a guy who got fried trying to help. That may be, Taltz said, but they've stopped calling you reckless. Kieran didn't answer right away. Then he said, what are they calling me now? Taltz didn't hesitate. Necessary. Kieran looked back at the rotating moon. That's heavier than it sounds. Then perhaps you shouldn't try to carry it alone. Outside the med bay, two students passed the corridor, deep in quiet debate. Would you have done what he did? One asked. I don't know, the other replied. But I think I understand why he did. And for the first time since the incident, no one questioned whether he should have. 12 days after the incident, Kieran was cleared to leave the medbay. He emerged gingerly, his posture stiff from healing bones, his left arm no longer in a cast but still bound in a compression brace. The hallway outside was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of the ventilation system. A few passing technicians nodded politely, though none lingered. He caught one glancing over his shoulder after walking by. "Do I still look that bad?" he asked. Jorix, walking beside him, replied without looking up from his handheld terminal. "You look like someone who crawled out of a plasma relay and lived." Which, to be fair, you did. Kieran reached for a support rail along the corridor wall and paused to rest. "I keep expecting someone to come yell at me for breaking containment protocol or for being in the wrong section." "They tried," Jorix said. "Twice." Taltz answered both times. Kieran chuckled, then winced. "And what did he say?" "That you're no longer categorized under disciplinary codes. You're listed as a contingency variable." Kieran blinked. "Wait, is that a real designation?" "It is now," Jorix said, finally glancing at him. "They had to create it to explain you." 3 hours later, Kieran sat on a stool in one of the auxiliary labs, elbow resting on the edge of a console. The room was dimly lit, the central module displaying a rotating model of the ship's tertiary power grid. Across from him sat Zhenli, a senior systems analyst and one of the few instructors who had remained neutral during the fallout of the incident. "You understand this isn't about punishment," Zhenli said, tapping a sequence into the console. "We need to determine if your decision-making was replicable or an anomaly." "I didn't follow a sequence," Kieran said, watching the model rotate. "I saw the leak readings. I knew where the conduits ran. I guessed where the pressure would fail first." Zhenli tapped again. "You guessed. Based on the layout and what I read, yeah, I didn't flip a coin if that's what you're implying." "I'm implying nothing," Zhenli said, "but the students are watching, and they're asking whether quick action matters more than procedural integrity." Kieran tilted his head. "You want to know if I'm a bad influence. I want to understand what kind of influence you are." Kieran stayed quiet a moment, then said, "I think procedure matters. But if someone's trapped in a burning corridor, I don't want the closest person hesitating until they've memorized the fire exit code." Zhenli didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "You've shifted the curriculum. Not intentionally, but measurably. Risk tolerance metrics have been revised. Emergency response now includes decision time thresholds. That didn't exist 2 weeks ago." Kieran leaned back against the wall. "I wasn't trying to start a trend." "But you did," Zhenli said. "And now we have to contend with it." 5 hours later, in the central atrium, Kieran found himself face to face with a group of students he hadn't spoken to before. They clustered near a projection of recent system diagnostics, pretending to review data. But their antennae twitched toward him and their posture betrayed anticipation. The tallest among them, a broad-shouldered student with dull green plating, finally broke the silence. "You moved before the override cycle was complete," Kieran blinked. "Excuse me," in the conduit. "You activated the bypass before the system acknowledged full isolation. That's why it arced," Kieran nodded. "Yeah, I couldn't wait for the cycle, I had to risk it." "Why didn't you just force a shutdown upstream?" "There wasn't time." The upstream controls were on lockdown from the first failure. Another student, smaller and more rigid in movement, leaned in. "Were you afraid?" Kieran looked at them, surprised by the question. "Yes, of course. I didn't want to get hurt." "I didn't want to mess it up. But you did it anyway." "I didn't think not doing it would end any better." They were quiet for a beat. Then the first student said, "We've been told not to emulate you." "I support that," Kieran said. "I don't want you getting fried just to prove a point." "But if someone else had gone into the conduit, would they have made it?" Kieran's mouth tightened slightly. "I don't know, maybe not." The smaller student stepped closer. "Would you do it again?" Kieran hesitated, then said, "If no one else moved and I thought I had a chance, yeah, I'd do it again. But I'd still be scared." One of them nodded slowly, as if that answer had filled in a gap they didn't know they had. Later that evening, as artificial dusk settled across the station, Taltz found Kieran sitting outside the hydroponics bay, watching the slow drift of nutrient vapor inside the sealed chamber. "You've become a point of tension," Taltz said without preamble. Kieran didn't look away. "Let me guess. Some students want to act faster now and others call it irresponsible." "Correct. There was a disagreement during a systems drill. One group rerouted power to an unstable node without full consensus. It worked, but it breached protocol." Kieran exhaled through his nose. "And now the instructors have to decide whether to punish them for a successful solution." "Precisely," Taltz said. "You've introduced ambiguity." "Wasn't my goal, I know, but ambiguity is contagious." Kieran turned to face him. "So what do you want from me?" Taltz considered the question. "Clarity. If you could go back, knowing the system wasn't fully isolated, would you still grab the relay?" "I'd hesitate," Kieran said. "But yeah. I'd still do it. That hesitation might have changed the outcome, I'm aware." Taltz was quiet for a while, then said, "You've made us reconsider how we teach risk. That's not a bad thing. It's not a simple thing either." An hour before rest cycle, Kieran received a message stamped with an instructor's seal. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he sat with Jorix in the auxiliary mess hall, a tray of lukewarm food between them. "They want me to sit on a panel," Kieran said finally, "about decision-making in emergency conditions." Jorix didn't look up from his notes. "Will you?" Kieran stared at the tray. "I'm not sure I'm the right person. Apparently no one else fits the category." Kieran picked up a utensil and pushed a piece of protein around his plate. "Do you think I changed anything?" Jorix's tone was matter of fact. "Yes." "You ruined a clean model." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "And that's good." "It's real," Jorix said. "And the students are finally starting to prepare for what's real instead of what's ideal." Kieran didn't answer, but he opened the message. 48 hours after the request to join the emergency response panel, Kieran stood outside Auditorium 3, absently flexing the fingers of his left hand. The brace had come off that morning, but the tendon still tugged with a dull ache. He could hear murmurs from inside, the sound of chairs shifting, boots scuffing the floor. The panel hadn't started yet, but the room was already full. He tapped the side of his neck, where the collar of his shirt stuck to healing skin. The burn had faded into a patchwork of pink and red, not quite gone, not quite raw. Jorix leaned beside the doorframe with his arms crossed. "You don't have to prove anything today." Kieran exhaled through his nose. "I'm not trying to. I think they're expecting me to explain something I don't fully understand myself." "Then don't explain," Jorix said. "Just tell them what you saw." "They saw the same thing I did." "No," Jorix shook his head. "They saw what happened. They didn't see why you moved when you did." Kieran nodded once and stepped inside. The auditorium lights dimmed as he crossed the stage. 3 other panelists were already seated behind the long desk: Instructor Wren, Lieutenant Varric from the Safety Division, and a civilian systems planner from the Orbital Department. Kieran took the last seat, the one without a name card. Directly in front of him, the first 3 rows were filled with students. He recognized several faces. Taltz stood near the back wall, silent, his arms tucked behind him. Instructor Wren opened. This panel was convened to dissect decision-making under uncontrolled conditions. "We are not here to assign blame or glorify outcomes. We are here to understand them." Varric spoke next. "The incident in Subsystem Corridor 7 raised questions about procedural boundaries. One individual intervened without clearance using an improvised approach. The result was averted catastrophe and significant injury." Kieran folded his hands on the desk. His knuckles were still mottled with healing tissue. The systems planner leaned forward. "We've reviewed the logs. Your access was limited. Your background is not technical. You acted anyway." "Why?" Kieran kept his voice low. "I didn't think I was the best person. I just didn't see anyone else moving." Varric narrowed his eyes. "And if someone else had, then I would have stepped back." A student raised a hand. Instructor Wren gestured for her to speak. You didn't wait for confirmation. You bypassed system delay locks. That's not procedure, it's instinct. Is that how humans normally react? Kieran shook his head. It wasn't instinct, it was a guess, a fast one. I saw the pressure warning spike. I knew where the leak was heading. I thought I could beat it, the student frowned. But without full data, how? I didn't have time to gather it. That's the part that's hard to explain. If I'd waited for every reading, I wouldn't have gotten to the relay in time. I had to trust that I understood enough. Another student spoke without raising a hand. That's exactly what makes it reckless. You risked a secondary explosion from the bypass. You didn't even know if the relay would hold. I didn't, Kieran said, but the corridor behind it was filling with gas. I figured a controlled failure was better than letting the system collapse. The room shifted, chairs creaked, someone coughed, Instructor Wren leaned forward. So it wasn't confidence, it was prioritization, Kieran nodded. I wasn't sure I'd make it out. But I was more sure that doing nothing would make it worse. From the back, Tout spoke for the first time. Were you aware of how the students perceived you before that moment? Yes, Kieran said. They thought I was impulsive, I didn't mind. Then why not prove them wrong? Why confirm their view? Kieran looked at him steadily. Because that wasn't the time to worry about my reputation. Another student stood up. You adjusted a system you didn't design. You used tools outside their intended scope. You forced a reaction that violated 3 containment protocols. That's not bravery, it's desperation. Kieran didn't flinch. It was desperation, but it worked. The student hesitated, then sat back down. Varric turned to the systems planner. Would any of your team have acted similarly? The planner shook her head slowly. Not without orders. They would have waited. Would that have prevented the failure? Unlikely. Instructor Wren looked at Kieran again. Do you think your decision sets a precedent? I hope not, Kieran said. I don't want people thinking they have to be reckless to be useful. I want them to be ready when things don't go according to plan. A different student, one Kieran hadn't seen before, raised a hand. What would you change if you had to do it again? Kieran thought for a moment. I'd ask for help faster. I waited a few seconds too long thinking I could fix it alone. That was the real mistake. The room went quiet. After the panel dismissed, Kieran stepped off the stage and made his way toward the exit. Touts met him halfway in the aisle. You said something that's not sitting well with them. Only one thing. You said your mistake was not asking for help. That contradicts what they assumed. They thought your mistake was going in at all. Kieran stopped walking. I didn't want to drag someone else into something I might not survive. That felt better than leading 2 people into the same fire. Tout studied his face. You've made them question whether inaction is safer. It isn't, Kieran said. It's just quieter. 4 hours later, Kieran sat in the observation alcove near the ship's dorsal array, watching the slow spin of the antennae against the starfield. Jorix arrived with 2 mugs, offering one without a word. Kieran took it, sipped, and winced slightly. Still bitter, he muttered. They haven't fixed the dispenser. Some systems just stay broken, Kieran said. Jorix sat beside him. They're recalibrating their drills, faster response times, less reliance on centralized orders. Good. Time doesn't wait for permission. They're also arguing more about what qualifies as a justified risk. They should argue, Kieran said. It means they care. Jorix leaned back, looking up at the stars. You've changed the conversation. Kieran didn't respond. He just watched the antennae turn, slow and steady, unhurried by the urgency that governed everything else. 1 hour later, in the student commons, a group clustered around a table, holograms of subsystem layouts flickering above the surface. They weren't running simulations. They were building new ones, scenarios where action had to be taken without clear data, where time was the threat, not the systems themselves. Would you take the relay offline with only partial verification? One asked. If I knew the pressure was rising, yes, another replied. But only if I had a backup containment barrier ready. What if there wasn't one? Then I'd do what he did. Across the room, an instructor watched silently. He didn't interrupt, he just listened. The question had changed, not why did the human act, But more and more, what would I have done if I were there? 3 weeks and 2 hours after the incident in the subsystem corridor, the Academy's Central Archive logged a final entry into the event registry. It was marked as Resolved Educational Impact Noted. The alert banner that had hovered above the diagnostics wing for 22 days flickered off. No alarms, no ceremony, just a quiet system acknowledgement that the crisis had passed. Kieran stood outside one of the low-gravity training chambers, stretching his left shoulder with careful precision. The physical therapy had ended that morning after his final scan cleared him for unrestricted movement. Muscles still twinged when he rotated too far, but the bone had set. The burns had closed. He could breathe without checking every inhale. Tout stood a few paces away, holding a narrow container of nutrient gel in one hand. "You've fully healed," he said without inflection. Kieran rolled his shoulder once more. "Physically, maybe. I'm still not used to being treated like a case study." "You're not a case," Tout replied. "You're a disturbance that clarified several assumptions." "Great," Kieran muttered. "Now I'm a lens." A student named Vexen approached from the corridor, his gait quick but not rushed. He stopped in front of Kieran and gave a short nod. "The council has finished their review," Vexen said. "They asked me to deliver this." He extended a small hexagonal data crystal. Kieran took it cautiously. "What is it?" "A record of your actions," Vexen said. "And the resulting procedural revisions. It's being added to the Emergency Doctrine Archive." "I didn't ask for that." "They didn't do it for you," Vexen replied. Kieran turned the crystal over in his hand and slipped it into his pocket without comment. Vexen lingered. "May I ask you something?" Kieran glanced up. "You're already doing it." "Why didn't you shout for help when the conduit flared?" Kieran's brow furrowed. "I didn't think anyone was close enough to reach me in time, but someone might have been." "They might have been," Kieran said. "But if I'd waited on a maybe, that moment would have been gone." Vexen nodded slowly and left without another word. Tout watched him go, then turned to Kieran. "That answer won't settle well with everyone." "I'm not giving answers to settle people," Kieran said. "I'm giving them the truth they asked for." 2 hours later, the Academy hosted a final debrief on the corridor incident. Unlike the earlier panels, this one was closed to instructors and open only to the students. They gathered in a smaller chamber, arranged in a circle without podiums or screens. Kieran sat among them, not as a speaker but as an equal. Life, who had once been the most vocal critic, leaned forward. "I've revisited the telemetry logs," Life said. "You didn't follow any of the branching procedures we were taught, but you did follow the logic of the system." Kieran nodded. "I reacted based on what the system was doing, not what it should have been doing," Brixil interjected. "That's a dangerous mindset. Systems are designed with expectations. Deviating from that invites chaos." "And sometimes," Kieran said calmly, "chaos is already happening." "That's when the system doesn't care about expectations." A student across the circle, one of the quieter ones named Relin, raised a hand halfway before speaking. "Would you have still acted the same way if it hadn't worked?" Kieran didn't hesitate. "Yes." There was a pause before Relin asked, "Even if it had killed you?" "I didn't want to die," Kieran said, "but I didn't want others to die because I was too scared to move." No one spoke for a moment. Then Brixil said, "You've changed the way we think about timing." "That's uncomfortable." "It should be," Kieran said. "Comfort is a luxury in emergencies." 3 hours later, in the command simulation dome, the students ran one final joint exercise. This time, the scenario involved a chain reaction of system failures, designed to test response speed and adaptability. The conditions were randomized. No one could memorize the sequence. Kieran watched from the observation platform, flanked by Tout and Jorix. "They're quicker," Jorix said, "but not careless. They're coordinating faster," Tout added, "and more willing to act without consensus when necessary." "That's not a bad thing," Kieran said. "As long as they're not reckless." A beat passed before Tout replied, "They don't use that word anymore, not about you." Kieran tilted his head. What do they use? Jorix answered. Decisive, sometimes calculated, Kieran snorted softly. That's generous. You made them redefine the line between initiative and danger, Talt said. You didn't erase it. You made them see where it actually is. By the end of the simulation, the student teams had stabilized the ship's fictitious systems with 2 minutes to spare. No one congratulated each other with noise or celebration. They simply stood there, absorbing the result, knowing they had done it without needing to mimic anyone else's actions. Later that evening, as the station rotated into its artificial night cycle, Kieran sat outside the hydroponics bay again, this time alone. The breeze from the filtration system was warm and smelled faintly of lichen. Taltz found him there but didn't speak at first. He simply sat nearby, arms resting on his knees. You're leaving soon, Taltz said eventually. Yeah, Kieran replied. Transport shuttle departs in 12 hours. No ceremony, no need. Taltz considered that. You altered more than protocol. I didn't mean to. I just didn't want to watch people die. You've become a reference point, Taltz said. Not because you were right, but because you were willing. Kieran looked toward the ceiling, where the stars flickered through the transparent dome like they always had. They'll forget me eventually. Perhaps, Taltz said, rising, but they won't forget what they learned because of you. The next morning, Kieran moved through the docking ring with a light pack slung over one shoulder. The station was quieter than usual, the corridors mostly empty. He paused once, near the observation window that faced the training wing, then kept walking. At the docking interface, Jorix waited with a folded datasheet in hand. We ran the numbers, Jorix said. If you hadn't acted when you did, Sector 7 would have lost pressure entirely. We ran that simulation too, Kieran nodded once. I didn't need to know, but thanks. You're not a hero, Jorix said, but you changed how we define preparedness. Kieran extended a hand. Jorix took it without hesitation. Take care of them, Kieran said. They'll take care of each other now. As the shuttle docked and hissed open, Kieran stepped through without looking back. The airlock sealed behind him. The station lights resumed their regular cycle. In the training wing, students continued their drills. In the archives, his name sat beneath an event tag that read simply, Response, immediate. Result, preserved. And in the minds of those who had once called him reckless, a new question had replaced the old, not why did he do it, but rather would I have acted too? And for each of them, the answer had begun to form.